Okay, let's continue on, and Dr. Malisi, I think you're on.
Thing we wanted to show you was, this is a graph of one school, but this shows you how SchoolNet disaggregates data and how we can reach deep down to disaggregated data. If you remember back to this slide that Dr. Williford showed you, once we get to that point, then you can just click right on the subject, and the subject will show, and the SchoolNet will show you each of the areas. So we just wanted to show you that. I'll be real quick. Questions about that? Okay.
Well, we can keep going, but we've talked about pretty much the elements of this slide, but this captures writing, DBAs and CFAs, and I know we had a discussion earlier about my access and writing. We're not going back there, but our DBAs and our CFAs have writing components as well. I think one thing to capture from here is where we started with writing and compare it to math. And so you see some blue there to see where we started with the pretest. And you also see growth as well from in terms of student achievement, but we definitely have implications for training in terms of how we are assessing writing at the school level and assessing and teaching those writing concepts as we capture it both in terms of the My Access data and then the district benchmark assessments as well. I think you have to get in your mind seeing that My Access data, again, this is fifth grade, and then the DBAs, just to see the differences in the achievement level. And once we're able to see similar achievement status on both levels, then that lets us know that we are moving in the right direction.
Okay, and again, this is English, grade 5, from a different school. And if you notice, there are different subgroups because this school has more subgroups than the others. The one thing that we do see as a trend, and I'm sure you've noticed, is that the students with disabilities are the lowest group in each of the graphs. So we know that that's an implication for work we have to do.
Okay. I used an example from one school and disaggregated the data. We looked at algebra. This school gave an algebra test on October 17th. When the results were disaggregated and item analysis was conducted, they found out that polynomials was a problem. So they retaught. This is what we're teaching schools how to do with the cycle of results. They retaught polynomials during the next 2 weeks and then retested everyone. As you can see, the results went up across the board except for black males, and that has some implications as to activities, the kinds of strategies we use with the students, and further disaggregation was done. There's more reteaching that needs to be done in that area, and possibly some professional development for our teachers in how they work with the different subgroups. But as you can see, once the reteaching was conducted, those percentages went up across the board for all subgroups.
All right, this is your learning stretch. I need to work on my PowerPoint skills for colors and graphs. But if you look at the numbers, you'll be able to, I think, understand what I'm capturing here. This is, I'm going to show two different schools here, and they're kind of bookends, opposite ends of the spectrum. This was their common formative assessment for Algebra 2. This was their second one of the year. This one focused on inequalities and quadratic equations. There's two teachers at this school that are teaching the Algebra 2. Teacher A has 4 sections. Teacher B has 5 sections. When you looked at the results from it, you saw that for both teachers, there were no students that were proficient. If you looked at the students that had enough questions correct, that put them in a second tier. For needs improvement, that they're closer to proficient and they need a different level of differentiated instruction or remediation to get them there. And then you've got a different percentage of students that clearly haven't met the standard. And so by breaking it down that way, we can basically go in, as said earlier, down to the student level, down to the strand or the different questions. We can do an item analysis of the question, throw out those questions that may not have been appropriate, know which questions we have to go back and reteach and retest on so that we can show improvement. What I've also done this morning, it's not on the slide, but if you look at the district benchmark data, you will see for this school that it shows 2% proficient. So it is not that far off in terms of the CFA and what the district benchmark is showing for Algebra 2 for this school right now. If you go to the next slide, this is another high school. There are 4 teachers in this high school. You'll see the same kind of data. However, you'll see teacher A has 65% proficient, and then you can see the needs improvement and did not meet the standard. And this teacher has 3 sections, teacher B, C, and D as well, but you'll see the proficiency numbers are lower. And you can probably guess why. We've got some honors level classes that are built at the high school level for algebra. So for teacher A, those students are actually freshmen who have taken and done algebra and possibly even geometry at a higher level. So you really do have to dig down to the teacher level, the student level, the question level, and so on. If you look at the bottom part, and you could have with the other slide as well, we also can break it down by race and sex, by students with disability, and ESL as well. And if you look at the benchmark for this particular school, as of this morning as well, this school was at 24% proficient. So you can see that, again, the CFA is pretty close to alignment when you look at all 4 teachers together as a group and all of the students as a school. But it is very clear that you have to disaggregate down to the teacher level, down to the student level, and so on. Dr. Hughes?
Can you just briefly add some clarity for the board around when we receive these results and your expectation as executive directors, when you receive the results and the analysis and you determine where there's progress and where there are glaring areas of concern with certain elements of this standard, what kind of dialogue that is rolled out in terms of communicating with principals and implications for what we do next to see this move forward, like the safety nets or the reteach or whatever it might be, because it differs from school to school. Just a little bit about that so that the board would know.
Well, I think the good news for both of these schools, and really for all 5, is when you look at their CFAs and you look at the district benchmark now, we're seeing better alignment of the standards themselves. That the teachers know the standards better and are teaching the standards. However, we still know that we have students that are coming in with a lack of a lot of prerequisite skills. And so as we're going through and identifying, yes, the data doesn't look good, but because we can drill down to the question level and do item analysis and all of that, it allows us to have the conversations either through our faculty meetings down to our like subject PLC groups. So that with department chairs, with the district support personnel for the content areas, we can have the conversation around what are the next steps in terms of differentiating within the classroom so that we can embed some of those questions or those topic areas as we go. What are some of the other options in terms of looking at mini lessons that could be taught, remediation opportunities, safety net opportunities, so that we can come back and recapture some of this instruction to move kids forward. Principals, or I should say administrators, are working in specific content areas. They've been assigned content areas that they have a focus on. And as a result, they work with the department chairs very closely, the district leaders, and those conversations are taking place. I do expect to see growth and expect to see growth continue. And our expectations are, we may not get where we want to be in 1 year from a proficiency standpoint, but we are definitely looking for significant growth. More than 1 year's growth in 1 year's time is our minimum. And so, we're expecting to make a good leap in terms of progress towards proficiency if we can't get there in 1 year.
Questions or comments? Thank you. Is that it for?
Did you want to go into the focus wall?
Yeah, time is not gonna permit us to
Okay.
go, yes. So thank you all very much, and I certainly want to thank the staff for how you all have prepared, both in providing us information and preparing for the presentations, for our work sessions. And, for those that were prepared to present tonight that we are unable to get to, again, you know, this is our first approach at this, particular, model, and, we'll get better. But right now, we're gonna have to move on to the budget piece now. You ready? Sorry, Dr. Open Campus.
Is this the third action item, the open campus thing?
No action on, there was no action on it, for this week. No.
That's right, because we're not gonna open until summer
It won't,
next year.
we hope to be ready
We're hoping.
to talk about action.
Do you want to do the two policies?
January's regular session.
Time's not gonna permit.
You see what
Okay,
I'm saying?
all right, as long as there's
So
no
we got
action,
time.
that's fine.
Okay, so, as we turn our attention to the 2014-15 budget, a couple of preliminary, comments I'd like to make, because this is, like other parts of our work, is certainly extremely critical, and probably, some of the most challenging work we do each school year, in my opinion. I would honestly say this is not the time of the year I look forward to. However, it's necessary. I provided for us, just for our consideration, budget goals for the last 2 years. Last year, in addition to the budget goals that I provided you with, we also used our 7 priorities. And we looked very directly at making sure that the budget was in alignment with those 7 priorities, and that the budget would move each of those areas forward. Now, of course, we have the strategic plan. Tonight, we may not, as a matter of fact, more than likely, we will not necessarily develop the budget goals per se, but we at least, I hope, ought to agree on the priorities, the areas of priority, and then begin to definitively hash out the wording of the particular goals. So there are several areas that I think we all agree on that are critical to our work. Professional development, safety nets, technology, early learning piece, and open campus must be a part of our budget consideration as well. So these areas of professional development, safety nets, technology, early learning, open campus. We've had a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of discussion in the city, and yes, now even in the state, about universal pre-K. We talked about funding the current waiting list. It has also been mentioned, and I'm sure it'll be mentioned again tonight, the consideration of looking at all 4-year-olds in the city. And then, of course, ideally, we will look at 3 and 4-year-olds. But these are all things that we have to consider. We never have a budget discussion without also including school closure and consolidation based on capacity and condition of schools, and cost savings, and as Courtney and I talked about, even potential cost sharing, perhaps with the city in some areas where we could save money. And the other thing I would encourage us to consider would be current indicators in our spending trends. So as we look at what this first semester tells us about how we have, what the spending has been like so far, I think every year there are areas that we budget a certain amount for that we don't quite spend that amount. So do we have some trends in particular areas? Well, we may not need to budget as much based on what our current practice is telling us. So those are just things I want us to keep in mind as we begin this discussion, and then after, of course, Dr. Thornton will have time to really massage this more. Dr. King? Chairman Hughes?
members of the board. I think you've done a good job of stating the current challenge before us and the current responsibility that we have around building the budget. And I think even tonight's presentations and discussions really the discussion could lend itself to implications around budget and the things that we know we need to do to move toward priority numbers 1 and 2 and beyond, of course. And so the difference for us this current year is that we now have the strategic plan before us, so we know that we phased it, and phase 1 includes year 1 and year 2. We're in the midst of year 1 right now, and year 2 has been phased, and so we know the items we're moving in that direction, and we would know those items that will be a part of year 2 implementation as well. So with that said, I think that really informs our work and aligns the decisions that we have to make with what's going to with what's going to drive movement in the classroom around student achievement, because I think that is at the core for us and the name of the game for us right now. So with that said, Dr. Thornton.
Thank you, Dr. King, Dr. Houston, school board members, good afternoon. You have before you a one-page document that provides an outline of a set of recommended budget goals to guide the work of resource allocation for fiscal year 2014-15. The format of the document, it's a one-pager, but it's somewhat different in that it's more expanded. The idea is that the goals themselves are aligned with the school board's priorities and specific strategic plan strategies, but it's a more expanded document to provide some of the thoughts or specificity around what we want to accomplish under each of those goals, where it's applicable. So you will see the first goal, to manage the impact, and some of the verbiage here can be somewhat technical, but the idea on number 1 is that we have to keep in mind that this budget and other budgets are influenced by enrollment trends and funding trends, as Dr. Houston mentioned about funding trends. So as we go through the budget process, we'll keep in mind that we want to have a budget that is structurally balanced, meaning that ongoing expenditures should be supported by ongoing revenue sources, that whatever we do, it needs to be sustainable. And we know that we have had to, like many other school divisions, rely on one-time revenue sources. But those sources are beginning to dwindle, so we need to probably make some very difficult decisions on the expenditure side as it relates to how can we sustain some of those costs that we've incurred that have been supported by one-time revenue sources, as we did in the current year, to the total of $7.8 million. So that would be A, under goal number 1. And then you would also have here to keep in mind that we want to maintain our focus on the appropriate class size. That's one of the most significant drivers of the budget. Nearly 75% of every dollar is focused on classroom instruction, which is driven primarily by class size. So again, within goal number 1, strategy or objective number 3 under goal number 1, target staffing and other resource needs. We know that we have some challenges as it relates to student achievement and accountability. So we want to make sure that as we develop these goals, that they're focused on achieving specific objectives that support the school board's priorities and strategic plan strategies. And then assure a responsible level of transportation. As we continue to provide more options for kids, it has transportation implications. And we don't want those other supporting areas to get lost in the idea of expanding programs and not having transportation to support getting the kids to and from those program offerings. And of course, instructional time, materials, and equipment, as well as responsive instructional programmatic needs, and then a desired level of school and student safety resources. Any questions on number 1?
I've read and I understand the goals that we have, but can we get into a little bit more in-depth discussion about how we want to flesh out those goals?
Yes.
Are we going to try to work on a 5-year budget plan?
So, I think the terminology has been debated terms of a 5-year plan versus a 5-year budget, which is a little different. So I think we do need to look 5 years out. And to answer that question, yes. And as we develop our priorities, I think we have to look out beyond just this year. So let me stop there and just say yes to a 5-year plan. We have to look.
Before we end this time, I want to make sure that I'm explicit with my individual priorities. So we could hear this all, and then we would have 5 minutes left, and then we'd have 6 of us, and we'd each have 45 seconds. So I just want to make sure that I have time to state on the record right now, tonight, my priorities individually.
Okay. All right. So let's do this. Let Dr. Thornton kind of finish, and I think you hear the board saying we want to definitely move quickly toward discussion, and so.
So in the essence of time,
We run down your
do you have any questions on the document you have before you as they relate to instruction, staffing of highly qualified, having competitive compensation, and all of the other support areas that these goals are intended to support in alignment with your priorities and strategies?
Yeah, I want to be clear, what Dr. Thornton has done is simply provided us with a framework. This isn't necessarily the goals. The school board, the governor's team, we work together on identifying the goals. He gets us started with the framework, with some contextual information, some background information, and at the necessary time, he'll provide us again with forecast of revenue and expenditures. Then it's up to us, the governor's team, to discuss what we have in front of us and agree on the goals, and as we talk about, the priorities, okay? But we got to have an approach to the conversation. Why you laughing? I'm not lecturing you. I just want to make sure that our conversation tonight is,
Make sure that we have a conversation, and that it's not just read.
and that is strategic, that is moving us
Yeah,
somewhere,
right.
And so, objectively, I would like us to at least be able to come out of this discussion agreeing upon some priorities. You take those priorities, now you can fashion your goals based on what's most important to us, 2014-15, and then over those next 3 to 5 years, what's most important. Then as we identify what's most important, we can begin to, put into place those goals that's gonna help us to accomplish those priorities. Does that make sense? Okay. So,
I'm gonna yield to Warren, and then I'll do my priorities.
Yeah, I just think we all have to first lay the cards on the table, and then we can begin doing it. But I want to first say that within the framework that Dr. King and Dr. Thornton has given us,
right.
my comments are going to be to address Roman numeral 1, letter E, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, letter L, and Roman numeral 5, letter C. So within the framework provided, my comments will relate. I have 3 basic, big areas of need to hope that this year's budget, within the context of a 5-year look, fits. First two bookends. Mr. Coleman, I like that word. First 2 bookends. On the early side, preschool education. Never have in the past 30 years since Governor Gerald Belial said he wanted preschool education, never have the stars aligned. We have a mayor and city council who has told us they favor it. We have a lieutenant governor that's just been elected. We have a governor that said it. We have senators that have said it. We have presidents that have said it. If we didn't make that a priority, I think we would be missing timing of our lives. The other side of the bookend is I think we need to begin to recommit and have a plan for the CTE, just so that we have some sense of planning. Again, we need to and so those are 2, but the foundation of all of this, to me, is teachers. So, for these needs, I've already stated some of my needs. So for me, 3 things. Preschool, emphasis on doing the 4-year-olds first until we know we can do those well. On the back end of the bookends, plan for the CTE. Also, a great deal of national agreement on a need for career technical education emphasis and teachers. The three things that I've requested previously and hope can be provided before we get into hammering some things out is that is the zero-based budgeting plan facilities analysis, and I think Mr. Gay knows about that, Dr. Simmons, and everyone knows what that is. So I'm not gonna, but I need to know that each of our facilities and how we're doing. Reason why is I don't want money to be siphoned off from teaching and learning for facilities. The same zero-based technology plan with each schools and how we're doing. And both Ms. Sikora and Rex Gay and Dr. Simmons knows exactly what, and I think they're both prepared to present those, but I would not want them to present those to contaminate the report on the demographic study. I would want the demographic study first. I'm not even going to ask that. Everyone said I would get it for Christmas. I just hope I can. But I know the weather has interrupted us. I know that. So the zero-based facilities plan, the zero-based technology plan, and something that I emailed recently, I really would like an idea of the starting teacher salary, the highest one in the area, because I really would like to look at 3 ways to support teachers. Number one, what would a percent increase, this is a request for making future decisions, just for me. What would a percent increase in teacher salary be for the next year? What would it be if we were to adjust the starting teacher salary to be equal to the highest starting teacher salary in the area? And third, what would the cost of a single additional day for teachers if we were to pay for that day? So there are 3 things that I need from personnel folks. 1%, what would it cost to move our salary scale up so that our starting teacher salary is equivalent to the highest starting teacher salary? And third, what would the cost of an additional day? Again, to finalize my comments, 3 priorities. On the bookends, preschool, 4 years old emphasis to begin with. On the back end of the bookends, the CTE plan for us to have a recommitment and plan for that. And finally, teachers, I want some information on 3 areas to see how we can better support teachers. In no way is that rejecting any of the rest of that, and thanks for the opportunity to at least state what I've been thinking about.
Thank you, Warren.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other thoughts? Yes.
And I apologize, Dr. Thorne, I do not mean to cut your presentation short.
Oh, no,
I
that's
know
fine.
that it's
This
very,
is
very
more-
important, but
This is a better use of time for me as well.
I know that you're proficient.
I know
in
what
your-
it is, you all don't, so go ahead.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Dr. Stewart had mentioned as far as the preschool education and the CTE high school. They're definitely a part of what I see as some of our priorities within the school district, and I think that we've said that it's always been our priority because we've been a leader in pre-K education because we have a full day of pre-K, unlike a lot of other districts. And we've already started with the planning of the CTE high school with what Dr. Goshen had already begun doing with all the presentations that we received last year. But now we have our local governments and now our state governments that have verbally said that they would support us. At our legislative breakfast, it was 2 big items. It was CTE and pre-K. So I think that what we need to do is, I really would like for us to move towards a framework of long-term budget planning. So whether it's 3 years or 5 years, I would just say let's just think of long-term budget planning, because we cannot say overnight that we're going to do 4-year-old pre-K. And we cannot go to city council and say we want 4-year-old pre-K and expect it to happen. But what we can do is say over time, over a 3 or 5 year period, we will be able to implement high quality 4-year-old pre-K for every 4-year-old within Norfolk Public Schools. And that gives us time to make sure that we have the facilities that can accommodate to that, the staff to accommodate to that, and resources that can be stretched out over that period of time. That way we don't set ourselves almost how we did last year with saying, you know, we need 80 math and reading specialists, and we all agreed we needed the specialists. But then we got into such a terrible bind about hiring them and then backfilling teacher positions. So if we allow ourselves to look at a 3 to 5 year forecast, we can plan something that's going to be, have a really good foundation, okay? So, so I'm okay with just focusing on four-year-old pre-K for right now, as far as a budget priority. And definitely the CTE high school, because not every student is college bound, and we need to be able to do something for our students that can give them different avenues other than college preparatory education. And to have it housed within Norfolk would be a tremendous benefit to this school system and to the city. And I think everybody recognizes that as something that they would want to look forward to and to move forward with. The other areas that I had as some of my priorities were definitely if we needed safety, more money towards safety nets. But that would come from Dr. King and his administration. I definitely want to be able to support the teachers in whatever percent salary increase we can do, whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever. They would have to come to us and tell us what we can do. And there was also some talk about the PB Young program and the wonderful things that were presented to us at our last meeting. And I agree that it's a good program and we should look at the good things that have come out of that program, specifically the fact that the students retained the material that they were taught. However, I don't know that we need to necessarily jump to replicating that program at several other schools until we get information on how those students are doing on their benchmarks and how they're doing on their SOL scores, because I think that that program is still in its infantile stages and we need to look at it over time, and then at that point in time we can make a proper budgetary decision as to whether or not it's going to be a worthwhile decision. So those were just some of my thoughts as far as the budget goes.
All right, thank you. Courtney Brandt.
So I will be brief in those that I'm replicating, and that is I agree with pre-K, the 4-year-olds. I hope to do it sooner than a few more years down the road, but I understand your position, Dr. Gabriel, that we have to walk before we run. I get that. But if we could do it sooner than later, and we could be, I think, a model, frankly, in Virginia, for really tackling this pre-K. Again, the wind is at our back, and I think we should take advantage of it. And I think City Council, to your point, and elected officials are very much interested in that. So should we ask for additional funding from either state or local, I think it would be looked upon favorably. I do agree with the CTE. I think your words, Dr. Stewart, are smart. Commit and plan, recommit and plan. Because maybe we need to think out of the box about CTE. Should we be doing this alone, or should we consider what Delegate James said at our legislative breakfast, where he said, you know, we're looking now at transportation regionally. Should we be looking at education in some cases regionally? Should we look at CTE across boundaries? I'm not saying that's yes, no, we should or shouldn't. I'm just thinking, are there ways to consider CTE out of the box? Just a little bit different. I do agree with the idea of clearly we need to focus on teacher salary, and also the word stipend hasn't come up quite yet, but we have talked over the course of time, should we do stipends for teachers that are working at challenge schools? And I know that that was considered this year, and for budget reasons, I understand it was not able to be accommodated, but is that something that we need to look to in the future? I do agree with Dr. Gabriel, too, about the budget structure. Let's have some, and Dr. Thornton, I know you're on this anyway, about the 3 to 5 years out and having a formulaic approach to it, and especially as it relates to working with the future of our facilities and technology. We can't look at technology 1 year, and then 1 year, and then 1 year. I do agree with Dr. Gabriel. We do need to look at the summer program. Maybe we do replicate it at 2 other schools this next summer. Again, don't scale it across the city because, again, we don't know necessarily the outcomes, but so far so good. So is there a way that we can do that with partners, at least in the next summer, to then get more data on the table that we can evaluate it further? The other thing I think we should consider is cost savings, cost sharing. I think we always need to go into a budget cycle with the ability to scenario plan. You know, what if we were to get cut 2%? What if we got 12% in addition? What if we got 5%? You know, whatever the scenario may be, we need to walk into it with an idea of how we would approach that scenario. So I think we need to have scenarios in mind that we then say, this is what we would do based on that scenario. And then in terms of cost sharing, are there things that we could do with the city that would allow both the city and the school system to save money in areas of like fleet maintenance or printing or IT or purchasing? You know, IT, I understand, you know, obviously we're migrating to Microsoft and Outlook. The city's already on it. Is there a way that we can scale that so their licensure covers us and we're not two different entities of which we're trying to engage? Now, I'm speaking totally out of school here. I'm not suggesting that that's something that can happen overnight or that hasn't been discussed, but I'm just suggesting that as an out-of-the-box way of, are there things that we're commonly doing, but we're doing it separately and paying for it separately? So just a few things I think we should consider, because as we want to do other things, we're going to need to find money to do that. And I believe that, one other thing actually that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Houston, that was kind of a program evaluation, and that is, of the programs we're doing now, which ones should we keep doing, which ones that we're doing because we've done it forever, and maybe not as valuable as maybe an Achieve 3000 or a My Access, and are there others that have just been legacy that we need to say, you know what, maybe not so much anymore, because we have these now new programs that are really of greater value, and we can measure that value now. So I think with that, I'll close in terms of my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. Brad?
I agree with the cost savings and cost sharing and program evaluation. That's always been my mantra. We have program creep. We need to do the best we can to make sure we spend the taxpayers' money appropriately. The three areas that I think that we need to make sure that we emphasize is the gifted program, because we always seem to, I want to make sure that the teachers are funded from day one, so that we're not trying to backfill at a later point. If we want to attract middle-class families to Norfolk Public Schools, we have to have an awesome gifted program. We need to pay attention to the alternative school. Right now, it's not a good option for a lot of students, and I think we need to make sure that we keep moving Madison forward. You've done a great job over the last 12 months. I'm very impressed with what's going on. It's still not where it needs to be for a school system like Norfolk Public Schools. And the open campus ties right into that, not with discipline problems, but with alternative types of education. Every superintendent that I've talked to from Norfolk for the past several years, we need a better place. We can't teach every kid the same way, and the open campus we have to make sure that goes through. Okay, thank you. Ed?
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Thornton, and then I would like to make a statement about my budget priorities. Dr. Thornton, could you further clarify point A on the number one, develop and implement budget strategies that promote structural balance? Could you further clarify what that is?
Simply stated, as an example, this year's budget was balanced using one-time revenues totaling $7.7 million. That was more than 2% of the total budget was balanced with one-time revenues that were savings generated from prior years. Those one-time revenues are not necessarily going to be available next year or in subsequent years. So we have to be very careful that we do not commit ourselves to long-term needs, long-term expenditures, long-term costs using short-term non-sustainable funds. So simply stated, we're paying for something this year that we intend to continue subsequent years, but we don't have full funding available in subsequent years. Is that?
Yes. Thank you so much.
And primarily it relates to contractual obligations and staffing. So when you bring in staff, your intent is to have them and continue with them. But if you're using one-time monies to fund that, then you're challenged the next year to find the funding to support that on top of increased costs in other areas and other initiatives.
Yes. So speaking of staffing,
Yes.
The goal even that we see here under that which you have enumerated to me is important, and that is targeting staffing and other resources needed at schools challenged to meet the local and state and federal accountability standards. I believe that that should be a priority for us. Also believe that we should have a priority in targeting student safety nets and enrichment activities. I'm also, I think Dr. Stewart is right in saying that the stars are aligned for preschool education, and I think there's a consensus among us that that should be a budget priority, and so I'm certainly very supportive of that. I'm also interested in the career and technical education piece that we've been pursuing, and the summer program of PBY Young as a piloted program, I think would be important for us to continue to support and fund, in particular since the community also is on board with that seems to be on board with that as a priority. I think Courtney has a very wise idea about the cost sharing, and I believe that that's something that we should pursue. And so these are my ideas in terms of budget priorities.
Yes, thank you, Rodney. Okay, this is first cut. I'm pro pre-K, but I don't think I'm as pro implement now as others. What I would like to see us do in the upcoming year around pre-K is seek funds to do an evaluation of how our students that are going through pre-K now are doing as they traverse the pathway from pre-K into kindergarten through 12. And I say that because there's research that shows that if you have 2 years with an ineffective teacher, that you lose all kinds of gains that you may have. And so it seems to me that we have created pathways of challenge schools. And I think we need to look at shoring up the schools that we have, the pathways that we have, so that as we bring these children in through the pre-K system, that all of the advantages that we know that take place with early learning can be sustained. And right now, I'm not sure that we have all the things in place yet to sustain that. So, however, I think embedded in the principles of the Transformation Initiative, the extended day that we've talked about, the extended year perhaps, or at least early start dates, I think we need to look at how we support those principles. If we determine that extended day is necessary and more academic time is important, then I'd like for us to give some attention to that now in the current budget cycle. Along with that, I think culture and climate. There's other research that shows that while I definitely believe that our salary levels need to be much more competitive than what they are, but there's other research that shows that climate and culture is what teachers value. And so I know we've talked about professional development for teachers, but I think also for administrators and others needs to be, somehow we can invest in a system, and I don't know what that is, that makes Norfolk Public Schools the most desired place to work, whether you're a teacher, a principal, or an executive. I like to see us explore that and begin to invest in that, however that may look coming from the administration. I don't think we can, we've seen significant staff turnover. I don't think it's staff turnover because of salary right now. I think it's staff turnover because of climate and other things, and I think we have to find a way to stem that. extending that time. And then I also agree with Dr. Robinson in terms of he described the gifted program, but I think in terms of gifted choice rigor, you know, we know we have a lot to do on the ceiling, on the floor, but I think if we can begin to take some significant steps in on the ceiling side, that will help us with a lot of the things that we're dealing with. So whether that's expanding the gifted program, whether that's increasing, as is embedded in the transformation initiative, more choices for parents. I think that's something we definitely need to fund, and that touches on the transportation piece. So we started off, or ended up at some point last year, looking at the Dijon Richter study as being an important resource for us as we went into this budget cycle. I would like to know where that is, and where I think there's some information in there that's going to be critical for us, that's going to let us look at some of these things that we're talking about, facilities and other things. We need to know something from that, even if it's not complete. And then lastly, the ITRTs and other support staff. So I think our teachers need more support staff in the classroom, whether that's the instructional technology support or social workers or counselors or other folks that provide that support to teachers. Because based upon all the things that we've heard earlier today, you know, I still feel that our teachers are overwhelmed. And so if we can provide some additional staff support, I forgot the terminology, non-something staff support. If we can find ways of shoring that up, then I think that might give the environment for the teachers to de-stress a little bit, get the professional development that is needed, but also keep our students on the academic path that we want them to be on. So off the top of my head, those would be my areas right now.
Thank you. So let me offer a couple of thoughts just to kind of help us massage this a little bit. I think there are a couple of approaches we can take to this. One, strategic plan. This would be phase 1, year 2. Question would be from our superintendent, or for our superintendent, what do we absolutely need in order to stay on course with our strategic plan as we move into year 2 of phase 1? What are those absolute needs? Another framework we might consider in addition to that, we're all familiar with the start, stop, continue model of evaluating the work of a district. I think we could also use a similar approach by asking the questions, what do we currently have in place that we want to protect? As Courtney mentioned the different scenarios. What do we want to make sure we protect that we already have in place? What is it we want to increase or expand that we already have in place? And then what do we want to implement that we do not currently have in place? So what do we want to protect? What do we want to increase or expand? And these are questions that primarily we would want our superintendent to provide us with feedback. So increase or expand may be professional development and safety nets and enrichment. You know, we want to expand all 3 of those areas. So what does that cost look like? What does it look like for year 2 of phase 1? What does it look like for year 1 of phase 2? The increase or expand. And then what are we currently not doing that we have to start doing? So what do we want to implement? And what do we want to implement now in terms of, again, phase 1, year 2, what do we want to implement over the next 2 or 3 years? So we may be phasing in the pre-K piece and even some of the other areas that we've mentioned. The final question I would ask, just to see where we are tonight, and is if the 8 of us, had to write down, out of all the things that we've put on the table tonight, only three that we really need to make sure that's a part of the next year plan, 14-15, as well as those 2 years out, if we could only write down just 3, and I would really like us to do it, what 3 would they be? Because some of us mentioned 5 or 6 things, and given our current economic reality, we're gonna have to narrow it down. I mean, you know, again, this is much like a household budget. You know, there's some things you really want, but you know, you're not gonna do it this year, because you can't do it all this year. Yes, go ahead.
When are we gonna get a report from Jean Richter?
Well, right now, we have the white pages that we'll be getting out to the board. We can get that out, what's the day? We can get that this week, which is this is a status report.
Final report, I think it's critical. We can't do a budget and then all of a sudden get to John Rickno
Right.
information. It's critical that we have it before we finalize our budget.
Right.
Critical.
Well, I think we had some
And then the
setbacks.
weather issues.
So we do have a kind of preliminary summary, and we'll get that out this week. And then final report, Sam, we should be able to get.
Hopefully January. January, by the end of January.
Okay. Okay, so, can we do that? Because I really want to see where our thinking is. Can we write down those 3 things that are critical in our thinking? And I really want to kind of see where we are. I think that'll help us in our next step. And how many of you all agree with us at least looking at these questions or these areas in terms of protecting? I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, what was very helpful for us is we really wanted to protect classroom size. We did not want to increase classes. We really wanted to protect, what was it, when we had the meeting at Norview, which was a really, really good process when we first wanted to raise the teachers. There were some things we talked about, the community talked about, definitely wanting to protect, right? So it was, specialty programs. You know, we said we really wanted to protect those programs because they were being considered, at that time because we were having such severe cuts in revenue. So I guess I'm asking now, how many of us agree with it, with utilizing that approach as a part of the process, not the end all be all, the protect, increase, implement? Is that useful, helpful?
Just clarification on is somewhere in that framework still the concept of identifying all that we do want? You know, we had the conversation last year before the difference between beginning the conversation around what we think we might have.
Right.
You know, which I kind of see in the protect mode.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out what's the offensive mode. So if we.
That's the increase.
That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get clarity on. So in the increase is building upon what you have.
Exactly.
And then the protect is protecting what you have.
Right. So we want to make sure we don't cut anything from these areas.
So where's the piece? I thought you said something around.
Implement something we're not doing, but we need to implement.
Some new stuff.
Right.
Some new essential.
Some new, exactly. Exactly. Is that helpful for you? Okay, so can we go with the 3 right now? You could only list, because again, some of our comments duplicated, you know, what was already said. Some had about 8 things, you know. I mean, it's okay. I mean, that's not a criticism. But right now, you're 3. You done?
Oh, you want them now?
Yes.
Oh, you want us to give them?
Are we gonna read them off, and Janelle's gonna tell us which ones kind of rise to the top. Sam's gonna work on these areas for us, right?
The protect.
And I also think we need Dr. King's input too.
That's what I'm
We
saying.
haven't heard from you tonight necessarily about what you would. And I know some of yours probably do echo ours, but you certainly have a perspective different than some of us.
I didn't do it like
Which
I
is a
did
good
you in
thing.
the meeting the other day, did I?
You would like to hear from me? Is that what you
Well,
said?
no, I'm just saying, we have to be
At some point.
respectful at some point. We need to hear what your thoughts are.
Absolutely, without question.
I would like to hear it right now, personally.
Yeah.
Right?
I didn't mean to put you on the
If
spot.
you have
Sorry.
somebody, if you have some
Edit that
thoughts,
microphone right there.
if you have some thoughts, I
So
would.
sorry.
Okay, I think it is extremely important that we have an essential focus in the budget that allows us to provide training, professional development for administrators, building level principals to do many of the things that we've talked about. In addition to that, we must include teachers. So building level administrators and teachers, training, professional development of utmost importance. It is also extremely important that we focus on our technology needs. And so when I say that, you have to understand that that's somewhat multifaceted, because in some places that means infrastructure. You heard what we said about SchoolNet, when some schools may not be up to par. Some of that is because of the infrastructure or what the building can or cannot do and accommodate. And other pieces would be teachers being able to use technology appropriately as a tool to move student achievement forward. So when I say technology, that's what I mean, because you got technology enhanced items on the high stakes test. So that's a readiness piece as it relates to technology. And the other piece, it relates to students and technology. We have to have them savvy enough and prepared so that when they leave us, that they can do the things that are necessary as it relates to technology. I also think it's extremely important that we focus on the benefit of open campus. We have no non-traditional opportunities for children. By that I mean we have too many children that are over age in middle school. We have no non-traditional channel for them to get them back on track and get them graduated on time, and that is possible. And so when open campus opens the door for that. We have too many children on the high school campuses that are so far behind that mathematically they cannot graduate from in a traditional setting. However, they are bright enough and astute enough to graduate. All these things increase your graduation rate and decrease your dropout rate and leads us to accreditation as well. So open campus is a void. Right now, fills a void that we have in place. The other piece is long-term look at, well, beginning immediately to plan the whole notion of career readiness, which is CTE. That centers on college and career readiness. We know that not 100% of our children will go directly into college, but I do think it is our responsibility to work to prepare 100%, knowing that they won't choose necessarily, but we still should have as our charge to prepare children. However, those that do not choose need to be able to go into the avenue of work with some area of specialty or industry level certification. So those are some items that I think are extremely important. Now you notice I didn't mention safety nets because in my view, that's a given. And so
you got to mention that.
well, okay, well then since it's not, yeah, well since that needs to continue, and I think that goes back to differentiated support, however, because the amount of money you need for safety nets in one place is not the same as the amount of money you need in safety nets for another. So we need to have some way to differentiate that whole process on how we support schools. So I think that's about 4 things.
I think
Is it 5? It's 5. Well, I lumped 2 together, so I tried to slip.
Don't worry, I put 6 together to make 3.
the discussion is very important because it causes us to understand some things that we may not have had a perspective on. Like, for instance, this whole emphasis on professional development that you mentioned. Of course, you may be mentioning it for different reasons, but the problem of climate in Norfolk Public Schools, as associated with professional development, is an important piece. And I have seen that problem, but I've not associated with where in the budget that could be improved. So this is a good discussion, and I think it causes me to understand, where we can concentrate that at. But the other part of this has to do with the challenge schools. And in my thinking, whatever we can do in the budget that can address the needs of the challenge schools immediately is important. And that's why I think safety nets are things that we have to focus on and put a priority on. And, why we need to have a targeting of staff and resources at these challenge schools. So I know that long-term planning is important, and ultimately, that long-term planning and such things like, and I fully support preschool education is important. But the needs of these schools that are challenged, that we are facing right now, to the extent that we can identify what in the budget will help these schools, I think is very important.
Thank you. Mark?
I want to make sure in one sentence that we are planning the annual operating budget, but we have to do this in coordination with the CIP. We have to coordinate it with the CIP. Therefore, we need the demographic study and the two requests that I made for the zero-based facilities and zero-based technology. We've got to see them together, and we've got to see it multi-year. We can't keep just thinking 1 year at a time.
Have you submitted a request for what you're asking for,
What?
zero-based?
I've been talking about that for 6 months.
No, I guess, but is
both-
there some information that you're after, because I want to make sure we're real clear. Is there some information that you
The construction
need?
committee is well aware of it and been working on it. I
Okay.
requested they not present it until the demographic study,
Okay.
because I do not want to subvert that information. And Andrea Sikora is well aware, because she heard that 4 months ago. So both, I think, are prepared to present that information, but it should not be in advance of the demographic study.
Okay. What's that? Okay, students on the pre-K waiting list. So you got 6 things. You really want.
He had commas, so it's only 3. You put commas.
It's more personal. Isn't like 75% of our budget teacher salaries and healthcare costs? 85%. So we're really only looking at a very small percentage of wiggle room.
And then the other are obligated through utilities and utilities and other contractual obligations, service agreements, things like that. So as we shared in that slide in the initial budget outlook, only about $17 million or so of the $300 million budget is really from a short of fundamentally changing how we do things, program offerings. From a cost-saving standpoint, we're limited because after 3 or 4 years of cutting. The other thing, it was mentioned, technology integration. Dr. King mentioned that. One of the budget reduction strategies that was implemented a few years ago was to, as we all know, was to reduce the number of instructional technology resource teachers. The state has allowed, well, the state has not enforced doing these state funding cuts, compliance with that staffing ratio. So we need to be very sensitive as a state now. In their minds, will probably feel like they're beginning to fund schools again with this next biennial budget that's coming up. We're going to probably be held more accountable for those ITRTs and not being in compliance. So we need to be sensitive to that, to Dr. King's point about technology integration.
Is that currently included in the state's funding formula?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So a couple of things I would ask us to consider for next step. One, I'm going to just talk about time. Our next meeting, essentially a business meeting, okay, on the 18th. Then the work session on January 8th, of course, 22nd board meeting. So I know, thank you, that meeting times the days are long. One of the things we've done in former years, though, is added days during this time of the year just for budget. I don't think we're going to be able to get around it, to be honest with you, because there's some things we got to hash out here. And if you look at just the days we have coming up in January, before you know it, we'll be into February, which is crunch time. Budget has to be done March 30th, correct. April 1st, we submitted to the council. And so we have to consider looking at adding, I believe, 1 or 2 just budget meetings. That's the first thing related to time. Secondly, I would ask, given the information we just received in terms of the percentage of the budget that we have to work with here, and we're talking about, trying to get more money from the city, for funding, some of these areas. And again, we would have to be talking about level and an increase of level funding for it to be sustainable. Because again, Dr. Thornton made it clear what happens with one-time money really limits your, especially when you talk about long-term planning. So we have to keep in mind what it is we're considering here as we look at our revenue and asking for increased support from the city. I think it would be helpful if we use this structure and submitted our thoughts into Janelle. What is it we want to protect? I think that would be helpful for us when we come back together. I think we could have a clearer picture. What is it we want to increase or expand? What is it we want to implement? And we're not currently doing it. I mean, it's the best I have tonight to move us forward. We got to have some structure that will inform or framework our work as we move forward with this. And perhaps that would then help us in our next time together to get really clear on the goals of the budget for this year. And then we begin making sure that we align our plans, because we're gonna have some numbers in January as we get the budgets proposed, the governor's proposed budget, we'll begin to get a clearer look at what revenue is going to look like. And if we have those goals in place and they're clear, we can begin to align our resources to our goals and begin to start having conversations that we need to have for requesting additional support. No other than
Do we have a full-time grant writer?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, and then I know that when we were talking about the transformation way back, we were talking about lots of grants and monies that would be available. You know, should we consider, charter transformation or charter conversion? And we had submitted an application for Race to the Top. We didn't get it, or?
Do we anything back on the anybody in the state?
Let me say this quickly. We need some numbers on the open campus too, as soon as possible.
Well, I just put that out there because I know that we don't want to look at one-time funding, but having someone on staff that's a grant writer, because we are a district in need, we are an urban district, and
Right.
That might be able,
Right.
and that would show something at least to the city and the state to say, hey, we're looking at other sources for funding.
Right.
We're not just coming to you with open hands.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't look at one-time funding, but I think we have to really think about how we use it.
Right.
Years ago, we talked about what was the fund that we had with the president's first term, with the stimulus money. You hire with that money, hire staff with that money. When that money is gone, then that directly impacts that staff, yes.
So I think to support what you were saying earlier, I think Barb was mentioning whole scenario planning. I think that's something we definitely need to do so that we're just not shopping for the A's on the shelf, We're looking at the options of A, B, C, D, E, F.
Right.
And then secondly, Michael, where are we with the process you were putting in place of engaging the public in this process and putting together, right, the committee and then talking to folks in the committee?
What we're trying to do is get as much information. So at the earliest, the idea is that we would meet before the winter break for the initial meeting. But at that time, we won't have any state numbers. Then we would have a series of meetings in January leading up to the February presentation. So at the earliest right now, it would be the week before we close for the holiday season. But I'm kind of torn because I want it to be useful and I want the numbers to be there so we won't be just giving them some very generic scenarios. I'd rather meet with the group 2 to 3 times in the month of January and perhaps February leading up to presentation and really deal with specific numbers instead of ideas and things, because one of the things that we find out in budget committees is that because we've got such a difficult and narrow margin for making budget balancing decisions, that the average person that doesn't do this every single day, it can frustrate them. So we want to make sure we've got a pathway and then get feedback from the group instead of asking the group to kind of be ready day one to help us get there. Does that make sense? Now, if we were just starting like 4 years ago, and we would have lots of things to really say we could get to the cut. But right now, after doing so many cuts, it really boils down, it's going to be programmatic decisions, which the average
community person may not have the benefit of a lot of the background information. But again, to answer your question, January is really gonna be the time where we're really gonna have to focus in 2 or 3 succinct meetings. This is the gap, these are the challenges, these are the board goals, these are the pathways to get there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that, because, the governor doesn't come out till what, December 16th?
Yeah, you'll come out
So,
in the third week of December before holiday break.
Right, so.
It's 2 weeks.
Yeah, and so for us to have anything of reasonableness to
That's
share
right.
with the community would be very pressed. So I kind of, am with you, let's be smart about it and start in January with having the opportunity to have looked at the biennium budget
That's right.
and evaluated some of the discussion we've had here tonight,
That's right.
and
Give
have
them something
input
to
from
react
folks
to.
all over here, and then say, this is what our options could be.
Now, we get the superintendent's proposed budget in February, okay? And I think that, as much work as we can do, or information we can provide, or thoughts to him, prior to would help him as well. Because once we get his proposed budget, we have about normally two meetings, 3 at best, to finalize the budget before the end of March. Yes.
One more thing, on the protect side, I just feel like we're, because the conversation is often around expenditures per student, and last year, I feel like we kind of let this message get out there that, we're just flush with resources in comparison to others. What we're, in my view, part of what we're protecting right now, we talked earlier about the loss of the ITRTs and non-instructional support staff. Those things had significant impact, in my view, on academic achievement. So when we're talking about protecting something, I'd like for us to at least talk about maybe protecting at 2009 levels, whatever they were before all the draconian cuts.
So you've added another category.
No. I'm serious though, because I think that if we protect just what we have,
Right.
not really look at it in the impact of what we cut had on academic achievement, then we may be protecting the wrong thing.
No,
So,
I'm
I'm not saying there may be other things we need to let go, but
Yeah.
somehow we need to look at what makes the difference in the classroom and make sure that we're clear on that. And then let's protect that in terms of a number.
Right.
And then if there's other things that we can deal with those other things. But I mean, I'm not a classroom teacher, but just from my sense as a parent, just watching and, what's been going on, I just think that has had significant impact on a lot of things.
No, and I follow you, but I do think the terminology restore may be more helpful, and especially for those who have that historical, because we cut security guards, literacy,
Climate?
deans, but we lost a lot of money.
Those cuts we made that were SOQ required, those would have to be a priority because they have state funding tied to them that the state hasn't been aggressively enforcing during these last 2 to 3 bienniums. So if we do anything in terms of restoration for consideration, those SOQ mandated positions have to be at the top of the list because there's state money tied to it.
The SOQ is typically at a floor.
Correct.
And we needed to.
Right.
Okay, and so if we could at least begin to make some notes in those areas that I suggested, I think that would be very helpful, and email those in to Janelle.
So is that beyond what we just gave you?
Yes, you got the 3 things that you've given me.
Okay.
But I really would like us to consider, making those notes in those areas. What do we want to protect? And we may even add restore in the youth, what do we want to expand or increase? What do we want to implement?
I need those 2 reports from Gay, from Mr. Gay and Ms. Sikora
Right.
before I can begin talking about that.
Okay.
And embedded in both of those, sorry to use the word of the night, but
Right.
embedded in both of those are their view of what it is they have and what
Right.
they need.
Okay. Okay. All right, well, thanks again to the staff for your preparation for tonight, and for those that we didn't get your presentations, we apologize. We do have the information that we, again, remember, this is a work in progress in terms of our new model, but I think we're off to a good start. Sam, thank you for preparing the team for good presentation and good discussion. And board, I certainly want to thank you all. These are very long days, and still a recognition ceremony that'll start at 6 o'clock. I am going to have to be excused.
Did you want to
I have to
look at
go and
days
see
for
the Queen.
January, or you just want to do that later?
January 15th is the only day.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to look at days tonight.
Okay.
We come together again on the 18th, and
Okay.
perhaps we'll talk about some days that we can float out to the board. But we won't do that tonight.
Cool.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order, board members? Dr. King, anything else? Okay, well, we stand adjourned. Thank you.